Hey everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we're taking a little detour. Forget true crime. Set aside the haunted houses. Because tonight, we are diving deep into history. We're exploring a place so legendary, so dense with ancient wisdom, it makes your local library look like a dusty, forgotten bookshelf. We are going to unravel the mystery of the lost Library of Alexandria. Imagine a single place that held nearly every scroll, every book from the entire known world, and then it vanished. It's like losing a sock in the laundry, but on a scale that would make Marie Kondo weep. Can you even fathom a world where centuries of knowledge just poof? You probably wouldn't last a week. So, before we begin, if you enjoy what we do here, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always wild to think of us all connecting across the globe like this. All right, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft ambient hum, and let's ease into our journey. Our story begins not with a whisper, but with the ambition of a king. Picture it. The year is 331 BCE. Alexander the Great, fresh from a string of victories that would make any modern influencer jealous, decides to plant his flag on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. He chose a perfect spot, nestled between a lake and the sea, envisioning a strategic hub that would become a melting pot of culture and commerce. And now, imagine yourself stepping onto those sandy shores. The air is thick with the salt of the sea and the buzz of construction. You see grid-like streets being laid out, a stark contrast to the winding alleys of ancient cities we've explored. Remember getting hopelessly lost in ancient Rome? Good times. There's a palpable energy here, the sense of something monumental being built from the ground up. It's like witnessing day one of a tech startup, but instead of VCs in hoodies, you have architects in tunics arguing over column styles. One foreman is loudly proclaiming the superiority of the Doric order, while another dismisses him with a wave, championing the elegance of the Ionic. The drama is better than reality TV. The city, of course, is named Alexandria. Subtlety wasn't really their thing back then. But Alexander and his successors, the Ptolemies, had a vision that went far beyond trade routes and taxes. They wanted to create an intellectual powerhouse, a beacon of knowledge that would draw the brightest minds from all over the world. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, but instead of code and microchips, the currency was scrolls and philosophical debate. And right there in the heart of this thriving metropolis, the seed for the legendary library was sown. You can almost feel it, the weight of untold stories and discoveries just hanging in the air, waiting to be written. It's a thrilling time to be alive, isn't it? Just try not to step on the toes of a future great thinker, or worse, spill your imaginary iced tea on a priceless papyrus. Can you imagine trying to explain the internet to these people? I think their minds would simply melt. You find yourself strolling down newly paved avenues, the air still thick with the scent of fresh mortar and new wood. That initial rush of construction begins to fade as you move deeper into the royal quarter, known as the Mouseion. It's quieter here. Even the salty sea breeze seems to soften as it drifts through. And it's here, among the budding gardens and rising marble facades, that an idea even grander than the city itself begins to take root. Alexander may have had the vision, but he died too soon to see it through. The mantle of leadership now falls to one of his most trusted generals, Ptolemy I Soter, the new pharaoh of Egypt. But Ptolemy was more than just a soldier. He was a shrewd politician who understood that power didn't just come from armies. True, lasting power came from knowledge. It came from being the center of the world, not just for trade, but for thought. And for that, he needed someone to turn this abstract idea into a reality. He found his man in Demetrius of Phalerum, an exiled Athenian philosopher and statesman. Picture Demetrius as a superstar CEO hired for an impossible project. He didn't just want to build a library. No, that was far too ordinary. Demetrius proposed a goal so audacious it was nearly insane: to collect a copy of every single book in the world. Let that sink in for a moment. Not just the Greek classics, not just Egyptian historical records, everything. Every play, every poem, every philosophical treatise, every scientific text, from the shores of Spain to the Indus Valley. It was a logistical and financial undertaking that would make modern nations tremble. You stand there, half hidden by a row of columns, listening to the discussion between Ptolemy and Demetrius. Demetrius's voice is full of passion as he paints a picture of a place where scholars could compare different texts, translate them, debate them, and create new knowledge from the synthesis. This wasn't just a warehouse for scrolls. It was to be a nuclear reactor of the intellect. Ptolemy, with his strategist's eye, immediately saw the potential. Alexandria wouldn't just be a stop on the trade map. It would be the map. And so, the greatest hunt in the history of knowledge began. Agents were dispatched across the Mediterranean world and beyond with heavy purses of gold and a seemingly endless shopping list. They scoured the markets of Rhodes, Athens, and Pergamon, buying up any scroll they could find. But this was too slow. The ambition demanded a more aggressive approach. And so, a unique policy was enacted. Every single ship that docked in Alexandria's harbor, regardless of its origin or cargo, was to be searched. But they weren't looking for weapons or contraband. They were looking for books. You're standing on the bustling docks, watching this incredible scene unfold. A merchant vessel from Sicily has just moored, its weary sailors eager for shore leave. But before they can unload their amphora of olives and wine, a group of royal officials, formal and severe, steps aboard. They politely demand that the captain surrender any scrolls on the ship. Historians still debate whether these scrolls were permanently confiscated or merely borrowed for copying. Most evidence suggests the originals were kept for the library, and a high-quality copy made by the city's finest scribes was returned to the owner. Imagine clearing customs today and being told, "Welcome, we'll be taking your phone, copying everything on it, and giving you back a replica next week." Quite the welcoming committee. One of the most brazen stories from this collection campaign involved Athens itself. A later ruler, Ptolemy III, borrowed the official original manuscripts of the great playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. The Athenians, of course, were hesitant to let these national treasures leave. So Ptolemy put down an enormous security deposit, a staggering amount of silver, to guarantee their return. Well, he returned them. Sort of. He kept the priceless originals
and sent Athens back exquisite, meticulously made copies, happily forfeiting his massive deposit. It was a bold move, an act of state-sponsored intellectual theft, and it shows just how far they were willing to go. As the first scrolls begin to pour in, you can feel the excitement in the air. They are brought to special workshops, where they are painstakingly cleaned, repaired, and cataloged. The smell of old papyrus, a dry, sweet scent of reeds and thyme, mixes with the faint aroma of ink. You see the stacks of scrolls, each one a self-contained world, a collection of someone's thoughts and stories. This was the foundation of a dream, being built not with stone, but with words. And it was only the beginning.
You follow one of the scribes, who pushes a small wooden cart laden with newly processed papyrus scrolls. The wheels creak against the stone floor, a tiny sound amidst the grandeur that is slowly unfolding before you. You have entered the grounds of the Mouseion, or the Shrine of the Muses. And the first thing you realize is that this isn't a single building. It's a sprawling complex, a self-contained world dedicated to the intellect. People often use the words library and Mouseion interchangeably, but standing here, you understand that the library is just one part, albeit the most vital part, of a much larger organism. Imagine a strange hybrid of a top-tier university, a government think tank, and an all-inclusive resort for geniuses. That's the Mouseion. You walk along a peripatos, a long columnated walkway. This is where scholars would stroll, breathing in the fresh air and fiercely debating everything from the nature of the cosmos to the structure of a single poetic verse. It's like a modern tech company's walking meeting, just with more philosophy and fewer corporate buzzwords. The air is cool under the covered roof, a welcome relief from the Egyptian heat outside. You peer into the adjoining buildings. There are lecture halls, private study rooms, and even dissection rooms where physicians like Herophilus and Erasistratus made their pioneering discoveries of the human body. There is a great communal dining hall, the Syssitia, where all the resident scholars took their meals together, funded by the royal treasury. You can smell fresh bread and herbs wafting from the kitchens. The scholars who lived here were given a salary, room and board, and most importantly, they were exempt from taxes. They were essentially paid to think. Every graduate student today would weep with envy. Historians still debate the exact layout of the Great Library itself. No blueprints survive, only fragmented descriptions. Was it a single, vast hall with towering walls lined with book cubbies, or a series of interconnected rooms, each dedicated to a different subject? As you step into the area believed to be the library, you imagine it for yourself. Perhaps it's a vast, quiet space with soft sunlight filtering through high windows. Lining the walls are thousands, then tens of thousands of wooden compartments, each filled with papyrus scrolls. Each scroll has a small leather tag dangling from its end, called a syllabus, identifying the author and title. It was the metadata system of the ancient world, a courageous attempt to impose order on the chaos of human knowledge. The silence in here isn't empty. It's thick with voices waiting to be heard, ideas waiting to be rediscovered.
You can feel the sheer weight of accumulated history and thought in this space. But the collection grew so quickly that even this massive complex soon became cramped. This led to the creation of a second facility, a daughter library. This offshoot was housed in another part of the city, on the grounds of the Serapeum, a magnificent Greco-Egyptian temple dedicated to the god Serapis. This daughter library was no small thing. It's estimated to have held around 42,800 scrolls and tended to be more open to the general public than the main library, which was more of an exclusive academic club. You can think of it as a bustling public library branch, while the main library was the special research archive. Having a more accessible branch probably took some pressure off the main facility where the top scholars were busy with world-changing research. You are now standing in the belly of this intellectual beast. All around you, on those invisible shelves, are works we only know today from fragments or faint mentions. The History of Babylon by Berosus, the lost plays of Sophocles, scientific treatises describing primitive steam engines. It's all here, silent, waiting. The air is cool and still, charged with an almost tangible potential. And in this silence, you are about to meet the brilliant minds who turned this collection of books into a beacon of discovery.
You step out of the cool silence of the library, blinking in the bright Mediterranean noon. You're in one of the Mouseion's inner courtyards, an open space ringed by covered walkways. In the center of the courtyard stands a man, utterly focused on something deceptively simple, a vertical stick planted in the ground. He isn't looking at the stick, but at the small, sharp shadow it casts on the earth. He doesn't look like a general or a politician. He is slight of build, and his eyes have the sharp, inquisitive quality of someone accustomed to observing the world with care. This is Aristosthenes of Cyrene, and at this time he is the head librarian of the great library. He is a true polymath, a mind so encyclopedic that his peers gave him the nickname Beta, not because he was second best in a single field, but because he was so brilliant that he was second best in many different fields: philosophy, poetry, geography, astronomy, mathematics. In a world of alpha specialists, he was the one who could converse with and contribute to them all. It was a nickname that sounded like a gentle ribbing, but was in fact the highest compliment to his sheer range of knowledge. Today, you haven't caught him cataloging scrolls or debating Homeric poetry. You are witnessing one of history's great eureka moments. His experiment was simple in its design, but profound in its implications. Aristosthenes had heard an interesting fact. In Cyrene, a city far to the south near modern-day Aswan, there was a deep well. At precisely noon on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly to the bottom of it, meaning the sun was directly overhead and no shadows were cast. He wondered, did the same thing happen here in Alexandria? And that's what he was testing with his stick, a simple measuring device called a gnomon. As the sun reached its highest point in the Alexandrian sky on the very same day and time, he measured the angle of the shadow. It was not 0. The shadow cast an angle, which he measured to be about 7.2 degrees.
You stand there, watching as he carefully records his numbers on a wax tablet. A stick, a shadow, and a couple of numbers. It doesn't seem like much. But this is where the magic of human intellect comes in. Eratosthenes made two bold assumptions. One, that the Earth was a sphere, and two, that the sun's rays arrive at Earth in parallel lines. With those two ideas, he turned the problem into simple geometry. If the 7.2-degree angle was the difference between Alexandria and Cyrene, then it represented 1/50th of a full circle, 360 degrees divided by 7.2. Therefore, he reasoned, the physical distance between the two cities must be 1/50th of the total circumference of the Earth. The only thing left was to find that distance. He hired a beamatist, a professional road measurer trained to walk in long, even strides to measure the distance from Alexandria to Cyrene. The result was about 5,000 stadion. Historians still debate the exact length of the stadion he used, as there were several versions in the ancient world. But whichever one you use, his result is astonishing. You watch him perform the final calculation. 5,000 times 50. The result is 250,000 stadion. Depending on the conversion, this figure is only off by a few percentage points from the circumference we know today measured with satellites and lasers. And he did it with a stick. It's humbling to think you might need a smartphone app just to hang a picture straight. In that moment, you realize the true nature of the Mouseion. It wasn't just a place to store old knowledge. It was an engine for creating new knowledge. You have just witnessed a man with nothing but his own mind and simple observation measure the very planet he was standing on. The image of that small, sharp shadow on the dusty ground seems to contain the entire world. You leave the courtyard, leaving Eratosthenes to his calculations with a profound sense of awe. This was a place where the impossible became possible, where the mysteries of the universe were unraveled not with magic, but with reason.
After your mind has been expanded by your encounter with Eratosthenes, you find yourself drawn away by another sound. It is not the sound of a loud philosophical debate, nor the echo of a booming lecture. Instead, it is a gentle, almost collective whisper, a soft, repetitive, scratching rustle. Curious, you follow this sound to a series of long, light-filled rooms where the silent heroes of the Mouseion are at work. These are the scriptoria, the copying workshops, and the men toiling here are the Army of Scribes. You step inside, and the atmosphere is one of near-reverent silence, broken only by the synchronized rustle of dozens of reed pens on papyrus. This is the engine room of the ancient world, and these men are its human printing presses, scanners, and word processors. They are the ones who turned Ptolemy's bold acquisition policy into a usable reality. The smell of ink, a mixture of soot, gum arabic, and water, lingers in the air. You watch a scribe dip his reed pen, his calamus, into a small pot of ink, then carefully continue his work. There is no undo button, no backspace key. A single stray blot could ruin a day's labor, and their eraser was simply a damp sponge and a scraper to gently abrade the papyrus layer. The pressure to get it right the first time was immense. You draw closer to an empty workstation and touch a sheet of unused papyrus. It is made from the stalks of the Nile reed, cut into thin strips, laid in 2 perpendicular layers, then pressed and dried. You can feel the horizontal fibers on one side and the vertical ones on the other. Here lies a little-known fact. The horizontal fibers on the front side, the recto, made for a smoother writing experience, which is why most texts were written on one side only. It was both an ingenious and an incredibly fragile material. Their work was meticulous. A scribe would place the original scroll on a stand, slowly unrolling it with his left hand, while his right hand copied the text column by column onto a new scroll. Once finished, their work would be carefully checked for errors by a supervisor, a diorthotes, or a corrector. Imagine working with a boss who was quite literally looking over your shoulder, checking every single comma. Sounds a bit like my first job. But the work here was not merely about copying. The greatest challenge, and perhaps their most significant contribution, was translation. Alexandria was a melting pot of cultures, and the library reflected that. They held texts in Egyptian, Babylonian, Hebrew, and many other languages. To make them useful to Greek-speaking scholars, they needed to be translated. And the most famous translation project ever undertaken here became the stuff of legend. As the story goes, in the 3rd century BCE, Pharaoh Ptolemy II Philadelphus desired a Greek translation of the Hebrew Torah. He wanted it both for the large Greek-speaking Jewish community in Alexandria and as a crown jewel for the library's collection. So he sent a delegation to Jerusalem. 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes, were chosen and brought to Alexandria. They were not put to work in the bustling workshops. Instead, they were taken to the island of Pharos, home of the great lighthouse, and settled in 72 separate rooms. They were tasked with translating the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. For 72 days they worked, and when they were finished, a miracle was said to have occurred. All 72 translations were perfectly, word for word, identical. Of course, historians debate the literal truth of this story. Many believe the tale of divine coincidence was added later to give the translation a sacred authority, to prove it was truly God's word, perfectly preserved in a new tongue. A group project where everyone did their part perfectly and produced the exact same result? Well, yes, that has certainly never happened in the history of group projects. But whether the legend is true or not, the final product was real and of immense importance. This translation became known as the Septuagint, meaning the work of the 70. It did not just make the Hebrew Scriptures accessible to the Greek-speaking world. It became the version of the Old Testament used and quoted extensively by the early Christians. You are witnessing the birth of a text that would shape 3 of the world's great religions. You look at a newly completed scroll on a desk. It's a section of the book of Genesis, written in flawless Greek. It is more than just ink on papyrus. It is a bridge between cultures, a testament to collaborative effort, and a profound example of the world-changing work that happened every day within these walls. Leaving the scriptoria behind, you sense a different kind of energy suffusing the air of the Mouseion. It is not the quiet focus of the copyists, but a vibrant hum, a buzz of minds operating at high speed. You cross another courtyard where a small group is gathered around a man with a calm and steady presence. He is using a stick to draw perfect figures in a flat tray of sand. His voice is even and articulate as he explains to his students. A point is that which has no part. A line is breadthless length. That man is Euclid. He did not invent geometry, but he did something perhaps even more important. He gathered all the known mathematical knowledge of the Greek world and organized it systematically into a single monumental work, the Elements. You are witnessing the creation of the most influential textbook of all time. For over 2,000 years, if you studied geometry, you studied Euclid. He began with a few simple definitions and axioms, and from them he logically constructed an entire universe of theorems and proofs. It was simple, it was elegant, and it was the cause of millions of future headaches for high school students. You look at the triangles and circles in the sand, and you realize you are looking at the source code of Western science. As you are lost in the graceful order of Euclid, a sudden loud cry shatters the tranquility, erupting from a nearby building. "Eureka! Eureka!" The shout is one of pure triumph and utter astonishment. Seconds later, a naked man bursts out of the Mouseion's public baths, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with discovery. He runs across the courtyard, oblivious to the stunned onlookers, and disappears down a walkway. That was Archimedes. He was not a permanent scholar in Alexandria like Euclid or Aristophanes. He lived in Syracuse, Sicily. But he was a frequent collaborator, a friend to the scholars here, and the most practical, inventive mind of his age. You have just witnessed, though perhaps romanticized over the centuries, one of history's most famous aha moments. The king of Syracuse had given him a task, to determine if his new crown was made of pure gold or if it had been alloyed with silver. Archimedes had been racking his brain over the problem. The answer came to him as he stepped into the bath and saw the water level rise. He realized that the volume of water displaced was equal to the volume of the object submerged. By comparing the crown's volume to the volume of a block of gold with the same weight, he could determine its density and expose the fraud. A brilliant mind, though perhaps not always aware of social etiquette. But when you have just had a breakthrough like that, who has time for clothes? But Archimedes was more than his bathtub story. Later, you see him in a study, completely focused. There is no shouting, no running. He is carefully drawing polygons with more and more sides, both inside and outside a circle. This is a lesser-known but far more profound truth. You are watching him develop the method of exhaustion, a precursor to integral calculus. By calculating the area of these polygons, he was able to calculate the value of pi to a remarkable degree of accuracy. Of course, Archimedes is also famous for his legendary military inventions. Historians still debate whether his famous death ray, a system of mirrors that focused sunlight to set enemy ships on fire, actually existed or if it was a later embellishment. Real or not,
The stories of his war machines, like the claw of Archimedes that could lift warships out of the water, turned him into a legend, the ultimate get-off-my-lawn device of the ancient world. You reflect on the contrast between these giants. On one hand, the calm, logical order of Euclid, who created a perfect system in theory. On the other, the explosive, practical creativity of Archimedes, who solved real-world problems with flashes of genius. Both, and many others, thrived in this unique environment. You feel incredibly fortunate to be a fly on the wall, witnessing the very foundations of modern science being laid, one axiom and one eureka at a time.
You have walked the halls of the Mouseion, and you have watched the greatest minds reshape the world. The life of a scholar here seems idyllic, doesn't it? A paradise of the intellect, where your only job is to think, debate, and discover, while all your material needs are provided by a generous king. It is like a lifelong, fully funded scholarship. But as you stay longer, wandering the colonnades and listening to the conversations, you begin to sense an uncomfortable, underlying truth. This paradise came at a price. It existed entirely at the whim of its royal patron, and royal favor could vanish as quickly as it appeared. The Mouseion was not an independent institution. It was an extension of the palace, and its scholars, however respected, were ultimately servants of the pharaoh. And when the palace fell into turmoil, that turmoil inevitably spilled over into the sanctuary of the Muses. You begin to notice a change in the atmosphere. The lively debates in the courtyards seem quieter now. Scholars speak to one another in whispered tones, their eyes darting about cautiously. A cold sense of unease seeps into this warm, sunlit place. The cause is a messy and complicated royal power struggle. In the mid-2nd century BCE, the Egyptian throne was a tangled web of family intrigue, with two brothers, Ptolemy VI and Ptolemy VIII, and their sister, Cleopatra II, vying for control. After years of conflict, Ptolemy VIII, known by the unflattering nickname Physcon, or Potbelly, finally seized full control of Alexandria. He was not a benevolent patron of the arts and sciences. He was a cruel and paranoid tyrant. The nickname Potbelly might not sound very intimidating until you realize that Potbelly is about to have you exiled. Ptolemy VIII believed the intellectuals of Alexandria had sided with his rival during the Civil War, and so he unleashed his fury upon the Mouseion. The purge was swift and brutal. You witness soldiers, not scholars, patrolling the halls. Academic freedom has vanished, replaced by fear. This was not entirely new, just on an unprecedented scale. A little-known story from an earlier time foretold this fragility. Another librarian, Aristophanes of Byzantium, was thrown in prison simply because the king heard he was considering a job offer from the rival king in Pergamum. Rule number 1 of the Mouseion: the pharaoh is always a literary genius. Remember that if you want to keep your head. Now, under Physcon, the repression was far worse. He expelled Greek scholars, scientists, and writers from the city en masse. Anyone suspected of sympathizing with his enemies was driven out.
The great librarian, Aristarchus of Samothrace, the successor to Aristophanes, had to flee for his life to Cyprus, where he died shortly after. The brightest minds fled, seeking refuge elsewhere across the Mediterranean. You think faculty politics at modern universities are brutal? Try living here, where losing a debate could mean losing your job and your homeland. Historians still debate the exact reasons and the scale of this purge. Was it a simple act of political revenge, or did Ptolemy VIII have a genuine hostility towards the Greek intellectual class in general? Did he destroy any of the scrolls? Probably not. The physical library remained, but its soul, the vibrant community of scholars who made it great, had been shattered. You realize a stark truth. Knowledge and power have an uneasy relationship. And on this day, power had clearly won. The golden age, you sense, was over.
Decades pass after the purge of Ptolemy Potbelly. The Mouseion slowly recovers, but it never regains the full glory of its golden age. Like someone who has survived a terrible illness, it remains weakened and scarred. And now a new and even greater power casts its shadow over Egypt. Power is no longer decided by the squabbles of the Ptolemaic family, but by the legions and generals of Rome. You are in Alexandria in the year 48 BCE. The air is once again stretched taut. It is another royal power struggle, a family drama that had seemingly become the Ptolemaic trademark. This time, it is between the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII and his ambitious, charismatic older sister, Cleopatra VII. Their reality TV drama became so messy that they had to call in an outside consultant to sort it out. That consultant was Julius Caesar. You witness his arrival in the city. Caesar is not here to see the lighthouse or admire the library. He is pursuing his enemy, Pompey, in the Roman Civil War, and has been drawn directly into Egypt's own civil war. He chooses Cleopatra's side, and soon finds himself and a small force of Roman soldiers besieged within the palace district by Ptolemy XIII's army. This great city, this center of knowledge, has become a death trap. You can hear the clash of weapons and the shouts in the streets. The scent of fear is stronger than the spices from the markets. Pinned down and blockaded in the harbor by the Egyptian fleet, Caesar makes a desperate decision. To break the siege and regain control, he orders his men to set fire to the Egyptian ships. You are on a rooftop overlooking the harbor on that fateful night. You watch as torches are thrown, and the dry wooden ships catch quickly, burning like colossal bonfires. It is a brutal but effective military tactic. But fire does not follow orders. A strong wind blows in from the sea. You watch in horror as sparks and burning debris are carried by the wind, leaping from ship to ship, and then on to the wooden docks and crowded warehouses that line the waterfront. The smell of smoke begins to burn in the air, and the night sky turns a ghastly orange. It turns out that even future dictators have oops moments, but their oops moments tend to involve setting fire to a significant portion of a World Heritage city. This is the most controversial moment in the library's history. But there is a crucial detail you realize from your vantage point.
The fire is raging in the harbor district, where commerce took place. It is not in the Mouseion, the royal quarter located further inland, where the Mouseion and the main library stood. Still, your heart sinks. You know that those very warehouses by the harbor were often used to store thousands of scrolls, perhaps newly acquired books waiting to be catalogued, or copies being prepared for export around the world. Historians still argue fiercely about the true extent of the damage. How many scrolls were lost? The Roman philosopher Seneca, writing a century later, claimed that 40,000 scrolls were destroyed. Other authors, like Plutarch, put the number as high as 400,000. Depending on which ancient writer you ask, Caesar was either a heroic liberator or a careless arsonist who accidentally torched the world's knowledge. The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere messier in the middle. Eventually, the fire is extinguished. As dawn breaks, you look out upon a scene of devastation. The warehouses are charred skeletons, and a thin smoke still rises from the ruins at the harbor. The heart of the library, the main building, may still be beating, but this is the first time it has suffered a serious physical wound. It is no longer an untouchable sanctuary. The Purge of Ptolemy VIII was a wound from within. Caesar's fire was a wound from without. The library had now been scarred by both internal politics and external warfare. It had proven its fragility. And that was an ominous omen for the future.
After the smoke has cleared and the debris from Caesar's fire has been swept away, a strange silence hangs over the harbor district. The wound is apparent. But Alexandria is not a city that falls easily, and its ruler, now firmly in power after Caesar eliminated her rival, is no ordinary woman. You are witnessing the rise of Cleopatra VII. History often remembers her for her love affairs with the most powerful men in Rome, but as you walk through her palace, you see a different picture entirely. Cleopatra was not just beautiful, she had a razor-sharp mind. She was a shrewd politician, a brilliant strategist, and a remarkable linguist. You hear something astonishing. She is speaking to Egyptian officials in their own language. Here is a little-known fact. In the entire 300-year reign of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra was the only ruler to actually learn to speak Egyptian. Her predecessors spoke only Greek. This shows you she was not just a Greek queen on Egyptian soil. She was the Queen of Egypt. History remembers her for her romances, but you see firsthand that she was a brilliant CEO of a nation in crisis, who just happened to speak 9 languages, a true overachiever. With that dedication, Cleopatra was determined to restore the glory of Alexandria, and at the heart of that effort was the library. She understood that its value lay not just in its scrolls, but in its prestige and soft power it commanded. And to do this, she once again turned to Rome, not to Caesar, but to his successor in the East, Mark Antony. Their relationship is the stuff of legend, but it was also a powerful political and military alliance. And from that alliance, a story spread through the city, an astounding rumor that reignited hope among scholars and citizens alike. The story goes that to make amends for the damage Caesar had caused and to show his love, Mark Antony gave Cleopatra an unbelievable gift. It was not gold or jewels. Antony supposedly gave Cleopatra the entire collection of the Library of Pergamum, Alexandria's greatest rival. The number cited is staggering: 200,000 scrolls. You see new ships docking in the harbor, but this time they are not being searched by officials. They are solemnly unloading their precious cargo. Nothing says, "I love you," like 200,000 scrolls, probably plundered from a rival library. It was the ancient world's version of buying your partner a controlling interest in a major tech company. Of course, historians still debate whether this grand gift ever really happened. Many suggest it was propaganda, cooked up by Antony's rival in Rome, Octavian, who wanted to paint Antony as a traitor, giving away Roman property to a foreign queen. The people of Pergamum were probably not thrilled that their library was being gifted to Egypt. One person's romantic gift is another's grand larceny. But whether the story was exaggerated or not, you see the result. The scriptoria are once again humming with activity. Scribes are busy cataloging and copying new texts, many in a different style and format from the Alexandrian scrolls. There is a sense of revival, a new infusion of life. The wound left by the fire was being healed and even filled with the collection of its very own rival. For a moment, it seems the library is not just restored, but greater. It has absorbed its rival's knowledge and once again asserted itself as the undisputed center of the intellectual world. You walk the halls, now full of scrolls once more, and feel a resilient hope. Under the patronage of its last great queen, the library has a new lease on life. But this life is now more fragile than ever. It is entirely dependent on the dangerous and shifting political tides of Rome. This dependence was both a lifeline and a tightening noose.
The hope that Cleopatra had kindled was, sadly, as brief as a candle in a storm. The Roman noose you had sensed finally tightened. In 30 BCE, after their bitter defeat at the Battle of Actium, both Mark Antony and Cleopatra chose death over the humiliation of being paraded through the streets of Rome. You were witnessing the end of an era. The 300-year-old Ptolemaic dynasty was over. Egypt was no longer an independent kingdom. It had become a province of the Roman Empire, the personal property of the new emperor, Augustus. Alexandria was now a city under new management. It was still wealthy, still bustling, still a vital center of commerce and learning. But you can feel the change. There are more Roman soldiers on the streets. Latin-speaking officials now give orders to Greek-speaking clerks. A new layer of power, more pragmatic and less glamorous, has been imposed upon the city. And the library? It survived, but its role had become ambiguous. Historians still debate the true attitude of the early Roman emperors towards it. Did they continue to fund it as generously as the Ptolemies had? Or did they see it as a respectable but no longer vital relic of a bygone age? The evidence is unclear. The Mouseion continued to function, scholars still studied,
but the passionate royal patronage that had been its lifeblood seemed to have dried up. It was like a prestigious university that had lost its largest endowment. It still runs, but its glow has faded. However, the greatest threat to the library in this new era came not from imperial indifference. It came from the streets themselves, from the alleyways and public squares of Alexandria. A deeper change was taking place in the human soul. The classical Greek worldview, based on reason, logic, and the cheerfully capricious gods of Mount Olympus, was no longer the only option in town. The city had become a marketplace of faiths. You walk along and see a Stoic philosopher lecturing on virtue and acceptance of fate on one corner. But just a few steps away, a much larger crowd is gathered around a preacher from the mystery cult of Isis, who promises rebirth and eternal life to the initiated. The old gods, with their complicated family dramas, suddenly seemed a bit outdated compared to the intense, personal salvation offered by the new faiths. It was a classic case of an old brand losing market share to disruptive startups. Among these startups, one movement was quietly growing: Christianity. At first a small sect, its message of hope for the poor, of forgiveness, and of a personal relationship with a single, all-powerful God found fertile ground in this diverse and often unstable city. And alongside Christianity, another strange and complex intellectual phenomenon thrived here: Gnosticism. This was a quintessentially Alexandrian product. The Gnostics blended elements of Platonic philosophy, Judaism, and Christianity into a unique belief system. They believed that the material world we inhabit is a mistake, a prison created by a lesser, imperfect God. The path to salvation was not through faith or good works, but through gnosis, secret, divine knowledge. It's rather a bleak worldview, but frankly, after being stuck in Alexandrian traffic for an hour, you start to see their point. You realize the profound opposition. The library offered knowledge gained through logic, observation, and rational debate. It gave you the geometry of Euclid and the astronomy of Eratosthenes. But these new faiths offered something entirely different: salvation, certainty, and spiritual ecstasy. It's hard for peer-reviewed geometry to compete with the promise of eternal life. You stand at a crossroads in the city, a microcosm of the changing world. From one direction, you can hear the articulate lecture of a scholar from the Mouseion. From another, you hear the passionate sermon of a Christian evangelist. The very definition of knowledge and truth was now being contested. The challenge to the library no longer came from kings or fires. It came from a fundamental shift in the hearts and minds of the people, and the ground was shifting beneath the very foundations of the Mouseion.
Time passes. More than 2 centuries of the Roman peace, the Pax Romana, wash over the city. Alexandria settles into its life under Roman rule. It remains a bustling hub of commerce and glassmaking. The debates between Greek philosophers and Christian theologians continue, but for the most part, peacefully. It seems the city has found a new, if somewhat fragile, equilibrium. But the empire that gave it that stability would also be the one to bring the next storm. You are now in the middle of the 3rd century A.D. The entire Roman Empire is convulsing. This is the period known as the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year nightmare of constant civil war, economic collapse, plague, and barbarian invasions. The sense of order has completely dissolved, and Alexandria, the jewel of the East, is once again caught in a conflict not of its own making. To the east, a new power has risen from the desert. This is the Palmyrene Empire, ruled by the ambitious and brilliant Queen Zenobia. Taking advantage of the chaos in Rome, she carved out an empire of her own, stretching from Turkey to Egypt. For a brief time, Alexandria was occupied by Zenobia's forces. But Rome does not give up its most precious jewel easily. The Roman emperor of the moment was Aurelian, a tough soldier with a single mission: to restore the empire at all costs. And so, around the year 272 AD, war came to Alexandria again. Aurelian and his army arrived to retake the city. You find yourself trapped in the middle of a brutal siege. This was not a limited conflict in the harbor like in Caesar's time. This was an all-out, street-by-street war. The roar of catapults fills the air. The sounds of screams and clashing metal echo through the alleys. It seems Alexandria's fate is to be the priceless ancient vase placed in the middle of a room where two giants have decided to brawl. Zenobia's forces had fortified themselves in the oldest and wealthiest quarter of the city, the Mouseion. You remember, don't you? It was the royal quarter of the Ptolemies, home to the palaces, the gardens, and most importantly, the Mouseion complex and the great library. To crush the rebellion, Aurelian did something ruthless and decisive. He laid siege to the entire Mouseion district and leveled it. You stand at a distance, watching in horror at the systematic devastation. This was not collateral damage. This was a deliberate act of destruction. Marble buildings were smashed to pieces. Gardens were trampled. Smoke rose from an entire quarter of the city. The residents of the Mouseion, including any scholars who still lived there, were subjected to a very aggressive form of urban planning carried out by the Roman army. And it is here, in this chaos and ruin, that the story of the great library likely comes to its end. Historians still debate if this was the moment the main great library, the physical building, was finally destroyed. There is no record that says Aurelian burned the library. But if the library, or what was left of it, was in the Mouseion district, it is almost impossible that it could have survived such large-scale devastation. It's difficult to maintain a quiet reading environment when the building next door is being leveled by a catapult. When the dust settles and Aurelian's forces have regained control, you walk through what remains of the Mouseion. It is simply a field of rubble. The colonnades where philosophers once strolled are gone. The lecture halls where Euclid may have taught are just ruined walls. The library's exact location is now indistinguishable in the general desolation. This blow feels different from the others. The Purge of Ptolemy VIII had shattered the library's soul. Caesar's fire had wounded it. But Aurelian's war seems to have destroyed its very body. The intellectual heart of the city was brutally torn out. There is a sense of finality, an emptiness you can feel in the air.
But the story of knowledge in Alexandria is not over. For while the great library may have turned to ash, its sister, another flame, was still burning elsewhere in the city. More than a century passes. The Roman Empire has profoundly changed. It is no longer a pagan empire hesitating between faiths. It is now a Christian empire. The cross has replaced the eagle, and the street-corner debates you once witnessed in Alexandria have now hardened into harsh confrontations. Tensions between the growing Christian community and those who still clung to the old gods of Greece and Egypt have reached a boiling point. You are standing in the shadow of the Serapeum in the year 391 A.D. After the devastation of the Mouseion district, this is the last remaining intellectual and spiritual heart of the classical world in the city. It is more than just a temple. It is a fortress of the old faith, a massive complex built on high ground, an acropolis with formidable walls and a majestic 100-step staircase. And within those walls, besides the shrine to the god Serapis, was the last refuge of the daughter library. This was the last flame, the keeper of the legacy of Eratosthenes and Euclid. But that flame was about to be extinguished. The confrontation was ignited by Theophilus, the powerful and militant archbishop of Alexandria. He saw the Serapeum not as a cultural treasure, but as a bastion of heresy that needed to be torn down. Backed by the decrees of Emperor Theodosius I, who had outlawed pagan rituals across the empire, Theophilus had the excuse he needed. A minor dispute over a temple escalated into a full-blown riot. The city's remaining pagans, feeling besieged, retreated and barricaded themselves inside the fortress of the Serapeum. You are caught in the chaos, the air thick with the promise of violence. Then the moment comes. Theophilus, before a fervent Christian mob, reads aloud the emperor's decree authorizing the temple's demolition. It was a license for destruction. You hear the roar of the crowd as they realize they have official permission. They surge up the grand staircase like a human tidal wave. You hear the thud of battering rams against the giant bronze doors, the groaning of metal and the splintering of wood. The temple had been a library, a place of worship, and on this particular day it was also the city's largest and most violent demolition site. When the doors break, the mob pours inside. Their first target is the colossal statue of Serapis, a masterpiece said to be made of precious wood, clad in precious metals and gems. They tie ropes around it and pull. You hear a sickening crack as the statue shatters on the marble floor. They smash the smaller shrines, destroy the statues, and deface the carvings. It is a frenzy of iconoclasm. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, but a mob with torches and sledgehammers seems to have a rather strong counter-argument. After destroying the religious symbols, their fury turns to the scrolls. Historians still debate how many books, if any, were actually left in the daughter library at this point. Perhaps many precious scrolls had long since been moved. Perhaps the collection had dwindled after years of neglect. Or perhaps it was still a magnificent repository of knowledge, tragically lost on that day. Whatever the truth, the scene you witness is horrifying. The scrolls are dragged from their shelves. They are not read. They are torn apart, trampled underfoot. To the mob, this was not literature or science. This was pagan spellcasting, the teachings of demons. Who needs ancient philosophy when you have righteous fury? It's far less complicated and requires significantly less reading. You stand there, amidst the smoldering and desecrated ruins of the Serapeum, watching tattered pieces of papyrus drift in the air like dead leaves. This was not an accident. This was not the collateral damage of war. This was a deliberate act, fueled by the certainty of faith. It was the final nail driven decisively into the coffin of the classical intellectual world in Alexandria. The roar of the mob fades, replaced by a profound and final silence.
Another 2.5 centuries pass. Alexandria, the city of eternal change, is once again preparing to change hands. The Roman Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire, is weakening. Constantinople's grip on its distant provinces is fading, and from the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, a new wave, a new faith, a new empire is rising with astonishing speed. In the year 642 AD, you stand on the city walls and see new banners approaching. Not the eagle of Rome, nor the cross of Byzantium. These are the banners of the Muslim army under the command of General Amr ibn al-As, sent by the Caliph Omar from Medina. The city, after a siege, finally surrenders. A new era begins yet again. But by this point, the great libraries of the past are only a memory. The great library in the Mouseion district was almost certainly leveled during Aurelian's War 4 centuries earlier. The daughter library in the Serapeum was destroyed by a fanatic mob 2.5 centuries ago. So what was left to destroy? The answer is, not much. But that did not stop the birth of one of the last and most persistent myths about the library's fall. It is a story you would hear told and retold in coffeehouses and marketplaces for centuries to come. A story too good to be ruined by the truth. The story goes like this. After conquering the city, General Amr did not know what to do with the supposed multitudes of books still in Alexandria. He sent a letter to the Caliph Omar in Medina asking for instructions. Omar's reply was said to have been one of brutal and ironclad logic. He said, "Regarding the books you have mentioned, if what is written in them agrees with the Book of God, they are not required, for the Book of God is already sufficient. If they contradict the Book of God, destroy them." And so, according to the legend, the repository of ancient knowledge was condemned. The scrolls and codices were supposedly distributed to Alexandria's 4,000 public baths to be used as fuel to heat the water. It was said that the number of books was so great they provided enough fuel for the baths for 6 months. 6 months is a long time to heat bathwater. You'd think that after the first month, someone might have suggested using a more conventional fuel source, like, wood? For centuries, this story was widely accepted. It was dramatic. It was decisive. Today, however, most historians agree that this story is almost certainly a myth. Why? First, and most importantly, the timing.
The story does not appear in any Muslim or Christian records at the time. It first appears in the works of a 13th century Christian writer named Bar Hebraeus, a full 600 years after the event supposedly happened. Second, as we have seen, there was no great library left to burn. And third, many contemporary sources describing the Arab conquest make no mention of any large-scale book burning. So why did a false story become so famous? Because it serves a purpose. It provides a simple, satisfying answer to a complex question. Who destroyed the Library of Alexandria? Instead of a complicated, centuries-long decline with multiple culprits, this story offers a single villain and a single memorable act of destruction. It's like blaming the new management for a problem created by the 3 previous managers. It's convenient, but not exactly fair. You sit there, listening to the story being told with relish, and you realize a deeper truth. The physical destruction of the library was a tragedy, but the birth of this myth is another kind of tragedy. It shows how easily history can be bent and rewritten to fit a narrative. The final destruction of the library was not by bath fires, but by a good story that refused to die. And you sit and ponder, not just the loss of the books, but the fragility of historical truth itself. And so the story comes to an end, not with a single great explosion, but with a series of painful cuts stretching over 700 years. You have witnessed it all. The birth from a grand ambition, the golden age of world-changing discoveries, the first scars from an internal purge, the burns from Caesar's fires of war, the fragile revival under Cleopatra, the slow shift of ideologies, the devastation of Roman civil wars, the fury of a fanatic mob, and finally the birth of a myth to cover a complex truth. There was no single culprit. There is no simple answer. The library was not destroyed. It died. A slow death by 1,000 cuts. You stand now in the silence, not in a physical building, but in its very shadow, in the void it has left in history. And you begin to ponder the real question: what did we lose? The answer is, we don't truly know, and it is that not knowing that is the most tragic thing of all. It is a void, a great forgetting. Imagine the internet being wiped, and all we had left were a few cached web pages and millions of broken links. That is what happened to the knowledge of the ancient world. We have only fragments. In literature, we know the great playwright Sophocles wrote over 120 plays. We have only 7 that survived. Aeschylus and Euripides suffered the same fate, with hundreds of their works gone forever. We know Aristotle wrote a second book of his Poetics dedicated to comedy, a work that could have shaped our understanding of laughter and humor for the last 2,000 years. It is gone. Perhaps somewhere in those lost scrolls was the ancient cure for baldness? We will never know. In history, the loss is even worse. We have quotes from great works, like the History of Babylon by Berosus, or the History of Egypt by Manetho, but the original works themselves, the detailed chronicles of millennia of civilization, are no more. We are looking at the past through a shattered mirror,
trying to piece together a picture from the smallest shards of glass. And perhaps most terrifyingly, science and technology. Historians and scientists still debate what we lost. You recall figures like Hero of Alexandria, who built the Aeolipile, a primitive steam engine. It was treated as a toy, a curiosity. But what if his work, and the work of others, had been taken seriously? Were there blueprints for more complicated machines, insights into medicine, astronomy, and physics that were forgotten and had to be rediscovered over centuries, even millennia? Could humanity have had an industrial revolution 1,000 years earlier? It is history's greatest what if. We complain today of information overload. It is ironic to think that our ancestors faced the opposite problem, information collapse. The loss was not just of facts, it was the loss of context, of the debates, of the web of knowledge that connected ideas together. And the final mystery remains. Where did the last scrolls go? Were they all destroyed in the wars and riots, or did some scholars secrete them away in catacombs or distant monasteries? Did some simply rot away over time in damp, forgotten cellars? Or did a few of them survive, copied and passed down, their Alexandrian origins lost to time? The end was not a bang. It was a slow fade. You are standing in the empty halls of memory, surrounded by the ghosts of lost ideas. The scale of the loss is staggering, almost too vast to comprehend. It is a phantom pain in the collective consciousness of humanity, a reminder of how fragile knowledge is, and how much of our past is a story pieced together from fragments, with the most important parts, perhaps, lost forever.
But the story does not end in darkness, amidst the echoes of loss, because the idea behind the Library of Alexandria, the desire to gather, to understand, and to connect all of humanity's knowledge, is stronger than fire, stronger than war, and even stronger than fanaticism. It is a seed that was planted on the shores of the Mediterranean over 2,000 years ago. And that seed, though buried for centuries, never truly died. You close your eyes on the devastation of the past. A moment passes. 1,600 years pass. When you open your eyes, you are still standing on the coast of Alexandria, looking out at the blue waters of the Mediterranean. But the scene has completely changed. The air is fresh, carrying the hum of a modern city. And there, right before you, on the very waterfront, where the Ptolemaic kings once walked, an astonishing work of architecture is rising. This is the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the new Library of Alexandria, inaugurated in 2002. It does not try to mimic the past. There are no faux Greek columns or pharaonic statues. Instead, it is something entirely new, bold and symbolic. A massive granite disc, tilted at an angle, as if rising from the earth or sinking into the sea. Its glass and aluminum roof glitters in the sun, like a modern sunrise, or perhaps a giant alien computer chip. Either way, it is stunning. A vast reflecting pool surrounds it, connecting it to the sea. You step closer and admire the immense curving wall of gray granite that encircles the building,
and you notice an exquisite detail, a little-known but profound truth. The entire surface of the wall is artfully carved with characters from 120 different human writing systems, from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs to runes, from Arabic to Chinese, from Devanagari to Latin characters. It is a tapestry woven from the world's languages, a direct and beautiful homage to the original dream of Ptolemy and Demetrius, to gather knowledge from every culture. You step inside, and your breath catches. If the ancient library was a series of dark rooms and cramped shelves, this place is its antithesis. You are in the main reading room, a vast, open space that can hold over 2,000 readers at once. The tilted roof is now a colossal skylight, engineered to diffuse the gentle sunlight, flooding the space below. The room is arranged in 7 cascading tiers, descending like a waterfall of knowledge toward the sea. The only sounds are the soft rustle of turning pages and the quiet tapping of computer keys. This time, they have backups. Lots of backups. Servers, cloud storage, digitization programs. They have learned their lesson the hard way. This place is not just books. It also holds 4 museums, 4 art galleries, a planetarium, and a manuscript restoration laboratory. It is a modern Mouseion. And though historians will forever debate the details of the old library's fall, its legacy, its core idea, is undeniable. It is manifest right here. This new library is an acknowledgement. It acknowledges the tragic loss of the past, but it refuses to be paralyzed by it. It is a declaration that the desire to learn is an essential part of being human. It's a reminder that no matter how much we lose, the human urge to know what happens next cannot be extinguished, even if that means finding out which cat video is currently trending. You find a seat on one of the tiers, looking out the great window at the glittering sea. The circle, it seems, is complete. The sun set on the ancient library long ago. But here, in this very place, a new sun has risen. It cannot replace what was lost. Nothing ever could. But it is a promise that we will keep trying. We will keep gathering, keep learning, keep connecting. The dream of Alexandria is alive. Now let that image settle in your mind. The gentle light of the modern reading room, the distant murmur of the waves. Our long journey through the trials of history has ended in a place of peace and hope. Let the thoughts of the wars, the fires, and the mobs fade away. They are only distant echoes now, stories that have been told. Focus on the stillness of a library where millions of stories are waiting. Take a deep breath, and as you exhale, let the last tensions of the day float away with it. Feel the weight of your body completely supported. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. Just be here, now, drifting gently. The images of Alexandria, both ancient and modern, begin to fade, blending together like watercolors on wet paper. The marble columns and the granite walls, the papyrus scrolls and the computer screens. They all dissolve into the warm, comfortable darkness behind your eyelids. All that is left is your breath, steady and soft, breathing in and out. all worries melt away. You are safe. You are at peace. And sleep is coming, a gentle old friend, to carry you off to the realm of dreams.